Hi folks, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to use Visual Studio Code Live Share for online remote sessions using Python. By that I mean, for example, a teacher and a few students meet virtually in a live share session. In such a session they can develop Python code together, just like if you sat in front of your computer and your teacher looked over your shoulder and answered your questions, or even showed you how it's done. I am making this tutorial because we want to use live share during the hands-on sessions in the Espresso Summer School, but I think that using a shared virtual Python environment can be useful in a lot of situations. All you need for that is Visual Studio Code and its Python extension and its live share extension to be installed. And you need to be signed into live share, and you can see that by your username at the bottom. If you need help setting all this up, you can watch my tutorial on that. The link is in the description of this video. One note before we start. All of the participants of a live share session should use the exact same version of Visual Studio Code and all of the extensions. If that is not the case, unforeseeable errors may occur, and you can check the version of Visual Studio Code by clicking on Help, About, and then here's the exact version number of your installation. And you can check the version numbers of your extensions by just clicking on the extension, and then the version number is at the top right. And you could even install older versions of the extensions if needed by right-clicking on the extension, install another version, and then you can select any of the previous versions. The first thing I'm going to show you is the process from the point of view of a student who participates in a live share session. This is fairly straightforward, as you will see. In the second part of this video, I will go through the process of setting up a live share session as the host, which is a little bit more involved but fairly easy once you have done it once. Part 1. Joining a live share session. If you want to join a live share session with a shared Python environment, you just need Visual Studio Code with its Python extension and the live share extension, nothing else. There are several possibilities to join a live share session, and the most important one is using a URL. Now the host of the session has given me this URL, and I can join a live share session by copying that and inserting it into my browser. Open link, and then Visual Studio Code Live Share opens automatically and joins the collaboration session. Now, because this doesn't work on every setup, I will show you a different way to do the same thing. I start by opening a new instance of Visual Studio Code. Then I copy the URL I'm given. Then inside Visual Studio Code I go to the Live Share tab, click on Join Collaboration Session, and then I can insert the URL, press Enter, and then it should take me to the live share session. If you go to the Live Share tab and it looks something like this, then you are already in a live share session. And if there's no other participants in the session, then you're alone, and that means that you've started your own session probably by accident, which does happen, and you can leave that by clicking on Stop Collaboration Session, and then you should get the option to join a collaboration session. Then you click on that, you can enter the URL, press Enter, and then you're in the collaboration session with the others. Now, if you have already been in a collaboration session with your host, they may also send you an invitation directly inside Visual Studio Code, and it may look something like this. And you can just click Accept. And you're in. Now, to prevent confusion, I need to mention that for the sake of this tutorial, I'm running the client and the host on the same machine and even with the same account. So both host and client are called after my username. Now, if you are inside of a live share session, you can go to the Explorer tab And here you see the folder that is provided to you by the host for the sake of this live share session. And you can navigate through the files and even see where the other persons are at and if they highlighted some text. Now the good thing is that you can even edit this source file and even execute cells. Now cells are designated by these lines that contain #%%. And you can see that this is a cell and this is a cell because there's two of those lines. Now I can click on Run Cell and an interactive Python window will open up and will show the output of the code that I've just executed. This even works for matplotlib outputs. If I run this cell, I can see the output. Now, if we go to the host's point of view, we can see that a Python interactive has opened up for them as well, and they can see what we have done. Let's go back to the client's point of view and switch to the live share tab. Here you can see the other participants that are in the live share session, and you can also see the chat channels. If you click on that, you can communicate with the other team members. If we go to the host's point of view, and if they open up the chat, they can see the message. Part 2. Hosting a live share session. As the host of a Python live share session, you of course need Visual Studio Code and the live share extension and the Python extension, but also you need a working Python interpreter and you need the Jupyter package. And to check if that's true, you can open a terminal by pressing Ctrl-Alt-T. And then you should be able to write Python 3. And then the Python interpreter should open. Or if that doesn't work, you can try just typing Python. And this should also open up a Python interpreter. Now you can see on my system Python 3 and Python actually stand for two versions of Python, namely version 3 and version 2. And optimally you would want at least one Python 3 interpreter on your system. And to check if you've got a working Jupyter installation on your system, you can simply type Jupyter Notebook. And this should open up a page in your browser like this. And you can see in the terminal that there's a Jupyter server running. And you can end that by pressing Ctrl-C twice. And then you're back to the command prompt. If that didn't work, you should be able to install Jupyter by typing either pip or pip3 install Jupyter. And then you should confirm what there is to confirm, and then it should be done. And then you should be able to execute Jupyter Notebook. Now with that out of the way, we can fire up VS Code. And we should make sure that we are logged in. I am right now. And the next thing we need to do is open up a folder. And by that I mean a folder where all the files are in that we need for the live share session. And I've prepared such a folder here that contains all the files that we need. And what I'm going to do is create a copy of it. And I'm gonna rename it group. I created this copy to preserve the original state of all the files inside. This is necessary because all the files inside the folder can be modified during the live share session. And so I keep the original files safe and sound in this folder, and we use the duplicate for the live share session. Let's go back into VS Code. and open the folder. Click on File, Open Folder, and select the duplicate. Click OK. And then if you click on the Explorer tab, you should see all the files inside the folder. Now, if we select a Python script and execute one of the code cells, a Python interactive window should open up and show the results of our code that we executed. As I've mentioned earlier, code cells are designated by these lines with a hash %%, and in this case there are 2 code cells. Now the important part for us is that we started a Jupyter server, which is important because we need to share it with the other clients so they can execute Python code cells just as we are able to do it. Now in this case we're unlucky because the Jupyter server says direct kernel connection, which is bad because we cannot use that, as far as I know, to share it with a live share session. So what we need to do in this case is start a server manually. So what we do is close this window, open a terminal by pressing Ctrl-Alt-T, then we type Jupyter notebook no browser port equals 8888, enter, and this will start a Jupyter server in our terminal. In the terminal it says copy and paste one of these URLs, and I'm going to copy this URL, highlight it, and copy it by press Ctrl-Shift-C. A side note, inside the terminal you cannot use Ctrl-C to copy text, because Ctrl-C stops the process that is running, and so the alternative is to use Ctrl-Shift-C. Now we go back to Visual Studio Code, go to View Command Palette, and now we search for a command that's called specify local or remote Jupyter server for connections. We select that, click on existing, then we insert the URL that we just copied and press enter. And now if we start an interactive Python window, the Jupyter kernel is at the server that we are running inside this terminal right here. Let's see what that means. Now if I click Run Cell, an interactive Python window opens and will show our results, and now we can see that it is no longer a direct kernel connection, but we have an actual URL for the Jupyter server. You need to know that this URL is only valid as long as the Jupyter server is running. So in the case that this process has been stopped and restarted, you need to do this process again with copying the URL and inserting it into VS Code. Now you may be lucky and you see an actual URL without having started an external Jupyter server, and in that case you don't need to worry about all this copying of URLs. You can just go with a server that has been there by default. Okay, let's recap real quick what we have done so far. We have checked that we have a running Jupyter installation. Then we have created and opened the folder with the files we need for the live share session. And then we have started a Jupyter server. And now we're ready to start the live share session. For that we go to the live share tab, start a collaboration session, and then we can see that the session has started. We could make the session a read-only session. That means that all the participants can only watch what I'm doing. But in our case, we want to have a hands-on session so that participants are actually able to edit and execute source code by themselves. So I'm gonna leave it as it is. The next thing we need to do is share the Jupyter server. If you're lucky, there's already one up here and it appears under shared servers. But in our case, that didn't happen, and so we need to share it manually. We click on Share Server, and then we simply type the port number, which we set to 8888, press enter twice, and then it should appear here. Now, if we are unsure what the port number was, we can look over here and find it in this location right here. Now, to check if the server is actually working, we can simply click on this icon here. And then in our browser, this page should be opened, and this shows us that there's actually a Jupyter server behind this port. Let's close this again and go back to Visual Studio Code. Now it's time to invite the participants. And we can do that by copying the URL of our live share session. We simply click on copy collaboration link, and then I could insert that URL anywhere and send it to my participants. Alternatively, if you already have been in a live share session with your participants, you can simply go to your contacts and directly invite them. And then your client should see the pop-up message, and they click accept, and then they should be inside your session. And now the clients also should be able to execute code cells. Let's check that real quick. Run cell, then the interactive window will appear. And in our window, it will appear as well. And what is important to note is that the clients can only see everything after they have opened their interactive window. So they can see what I am doing if I am writing print hello world and run that cell. The client will see that as well, but they won't see what I have done before they opened up this interactive window. So it is very important that you make sure that everyone has an open Python interactive window and make them run such a hello world code cell is just ideal for that, because that will open up a Python interactive for them, and so they can see everything that happens after that. Now, you should also have a quick way of communicating with all the participants. And there's two possibilities for that inside Visual Studio Code. You can either start a chat with them, or you could even start an audio call right within Visual Studio Code if you have the Live Share audio extension installed. Now, before I end this tutorial, there's a couple of things I need to mention because they may be important to you. And the first thing is about extension versions. Now, during the making of this video, an update to the Live Share extension has been released, and that update broke the feature that participants could execute code cells. So I had to manually downgrade by install another version to the version 1.02478. And this restored the functionality that clients could also run cells. I hope that this issue will get sorted out in a future release, but until then you need to be extra cautious and also make sure that all of your participants use the same version of Live Share. The next thing is about sharing terminals. As you may have seen already, terminals can be shared inside Visual Studio Code Live Share, and you can choose whether they will be read-only or read and write for the participants. And I would recommend you to only share read-only terminals, because read and write terminals actually gives the participants complete control over your computer, and they can type anything in those terminals. And so this is not secure at all. Even if they don't do anything bad by intention, it might still happen by accident. There are ways to set up terminals with restricted access, which you could do, but this is outside the scope of this video. The next thing is about Jupyter notebooks. You can edit Jupyter notebooks inside Visual Studio Code, which is nice. But LiveShare doesn't allow for real-time collaboration on notebooks. This can be annoying, especially if you have a lot of course material laid out as Jupyter notebooks, which you might want to use in your LiveShare sessions. And one way out of this is to use this function called export as, and you can click on that and select Python script. And then you will get a Python source code file, which is basically the former notebook laid out as executable Python source code. And you can even see that the cells have been created by putting these hash %% signs everywhere. And the last thing I want to mention is if you go to Settings, Extensions, Visual Studio LiveShare, and then to the option LiveShare languages allow guest command control, I think you should activate this because it allows guests to run arbitrary commands via code actions and code lens. And code lenses are actually these small menus here, if I'm not mistaken. So actually this should be active. And although it didn't have an effect for me, I thought I might mention it as well, because who knows if this will have an effect in the future. Oh, one very last thing I have to say. If you are trying to use Espresso in a LiveShare session, you can simply follow the steps in the video that will be linked in the description, and it should work. I hope that you succeeded with your LiveShare session. If there are any problems that could not be resolved by this video, please let me know. Take care, bye bye.